Trimmings, which is, well, about the trimmings, not the tree trimmings we throw away or the fat trimmings we throw away, but about the decorative aspects that change the way we see things, that are usually seen as something obsolete, maybe decorative, but we're going to look at it from a different point of view today. And we're going to do that with the help of a really incredible group of people that I'm very honored to introduce here to you. Our moderator today is Edward Lifson, who is a journalist, educator, writer, man of all trades. You might have heard him speak on NPR many times in this show, Hello Beautiful, which is of course very fitting for our theme this weekend also. He is also the former director of communications for the Pritzker Prize, a general communications consultant, and does just about anything. The three presenters that we are going to see today are Annie Coggan. She is the principal of Coggan and Crawford Architecture and Design, as well as an assistant professor at Pratt Institute. You'll see from our panel also one of the great panels before also, one of the great things is that we have a lot of educators here, but also practitioners. So it's always a mix in between position. Then Deborah Schneiderman will be also presenting, also professor of interior design at Pratt Institute, principal and founder of deSC, Architecture Design Research. And then the final presenter will be Courtney Coffman from our own Woodbury University also, where she has been teaching in the interior architecture department. But in addition to that, she's also the development director of materials and applications, an incredible event space gallery that we have in town, and now also the program manager of XLab, which is a newly found think tank, which is has worked with UCLA as well as a school in Tokyo, whose name I forgot. I'm so sorry. University of Tokyo. So, without any further ado, let's jump right into it and get started with our first.
Never used one of these before. As noted, I'm primarily a practitioner, so this body of work is a little peculiar. I will say that I am a wannabe historian. Maybe I am a YouTube historian in the light of rigor that historians usually use. But what I put together today is a collection of buildings that I've been fascinated by, that I've been bothered by, that I have had a real intuition about. There's something really peculiar about them. They are all over-imagined interiors. They're not necessarily designed, but they're constructed. So I have been proudly saying I have no conclusions. I've done into this. I think I've made some leaps about their commonalities. So I'm just going to walk you through these series of peculiar places and tell you my observations, some from the fact that I've been in them or I grew up in them, or maybe not, are part of my childhood, and then newly, and one I've never been to, but one I just got to go to. So I have different relationships with all of them. This is a slide that I never thought I would be putting up at an interior design conference, but there you go. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and I went to the Atlanta Cyclorama in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. And the Atlanta Cyclorama is part of a tradition of panorama experiences that came about. This one was actually completed in 1885. It was a tradition of painting battle scenes in Paris in the 1880s. There was a need to experience the Napoleonic Wars, and then after the Civil War, there seemed to be a need to experience the Civil War. This was produced by the American Cyclorama Company, and there's a Gettysburg panorama, and there's one war that was lost. But the Atlanta Cyclorama was 358 feet long. You go into a building, and you're seated in the middle, and the seats would start to rotate, and you would experience, this is the Battle of Atlanta in particular. So the painting was completed, and then in the 1930s, another layer came in, which I'm probably more excited about. As a WPA project, they felt the need to expand the foreground. So they put Georgia red clay down, which is a vernacular material that Virginia's going to make some stuff out of at some point. And then they developed a series of mannequins and dummies of dismembered soldiers. They put down real railroad ties, and they sort of crafted bloody pools around to just make it. And as a child, you come into this in it was 1968, and it was the integrated South. We were there, and the narration, originally the panorama was to show the Atlanta populace that the Union had won. But as it became part of the community, Junior League came in and developed a narrative to tell us that there was another story, a more notable story. So by the time I was seeing it, it was a lot about the lost cause and the lost cause rhetoric. And I remember thinking, this is not quite like the right story. Even as a third grader. There's also a funny thing that Clark, one of the soldiers' faces was painted to replicate Clark Gable. And he was in a Union uniform, and I also knew in third grade that Clark Gable actually was a gun runner and not part of the Union forces, so it's completely false. We're back to false spaces. But the thing about this space was when I sit in interior design review and teachers are talking about immersive interiors, this is the space that pops in my head. This space that maybe was a little musty, had a red velvet curtain, had Georgia red clay, had dismembered mummies, like why that? Why that? And so I started following the trend. I'm just going to talk about this a little bit more. It's actually been disassembled recently, and they're renovating it for the new building. And so you can see a little dead soldier action right there. You can see the scale of and these are courtesy of the History Museum. You can also see this very temporary construct. It's paper mache. It's a big canvas and then paper mache. And they actually had to take the railroad ties out at one point because the termites were becoming part of the experience too, and that was not good. But this is in my consciousness. So as I move along in my career, designing bathrooms and kitchens, I also find this gentleman, and he is a New England gentleman born at the turn of the century, earlier, 1861, and he had an idea around 1918 well, he was a failed congregational minister, so that sort of lays the groundwork. And then he had to find a new profession, and he became became an entrepreneur, and he was an entrepreneur of American history. And one of his first Ralph Cramden schemes, which I know students don't get that, of course, but I have to use it, is he constructed a series of colonial houses. And he bought up these small houses, and he staged them. And you were to motor around, and you were to go from house to house to house to house to experience the burgeoning of the real America, the pure early American settler experience. So one of the tools that he conjured up was not paper mache or Georgia red clay, but he made a series of hand-colored postcards. And what he wanted you to do is walk around to every single, or drive around to every single house and stand in the space and feel like a colonial maid or a demure lady of the house. And there was a lot of rhetoric about how you were as a woman. He was particularly transfixed by the fact that his wife hooked all the rugs. There's a lot of hooked rugs, so I wonder about her life. But these postcards were really used as a tool to sort of promote a particular way, I think, of being of womanhood. And he never really used men in these postcards. He's talking about, I think, the domestic. I think it's an incredibly conservative view of women. So I sort of see, by looking at the cyclorama and these houses, and there's one left in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, if you want to go to a wall-smith house. I see them as tools for cultural commentary. Like, can you make a space that has a point of view? This is a relatively new space, and I don't know that much about it, but it was, it's a reconstruction of the Somme, Battle of the Somme trench. A little different, right next to a Welsh castle. Just wait, I'll explain. And so in 2016, it was the 100th anniversary of the Battle of the Somme, and there was many commemorative activities that happened in England and Ireland and Scotland. And this was a way for the Powys Castle in Wales to commemorate Sir Percy's activities in the First World War. He signed up in 1816 and with the Welsh Guard, and was in the Battle of the Somme, was injured, died in London. But what they were trying to do to build this commemoration was to show the juxtaposition of a landed gentleman, a landed British gentleman, versus life in the trench. And I thought it was really amazing. Well, one, who had that idea? Like, what National Trust board meeting conjured up? Let's build a trench. But the fact that somebody urgently had to show that dichotomy in the new style, I found really interesting and akin to cyclorama and akin to wall snutting. I have to get you in history. I'm absolutely manically, I have a need to have you feel these historic experiences. So these are, and this, it's just kind of a press release in the Guardian, so I don't have a lot of scholarship on this, but completely accurately reconstructed. So this last house is my favorite. been to it a number of times now. It's in Spitalfield, London. And it's an interesting history. In the 1970s, a young man from California went to England, I think after high school, deSC, and was transfixed by 18th century London. He actually started his career in London driving a horse and carriage with a top hat, a tie. And at one point he acquired, he's not quite sure if he bought it or they gave it to him, a house in Spitalfield. And he proceeded to spend up until, I guess he bought the house in 79, and then he died in 1999. He proceeded to construct the house as if it was a family house. He made up a family, the Jarvis family. They were a French Huguenot weavers family, completely accurate to the neighborhood. And then he proceeded to make the first level, early 17th century, second level, turn of 17th to 18th century, third level, 19th century, and then the top level, the latest sort of 19th century when the family had kind of deteriorated into genteel poverty. And all of these, so it's an over-imagined interior. It's a layering of history, much like the cyclorama, where one history is 1885, the making of the space, and the next history is 1930. And he kind of has done the best, is he used things that are evident in cyclorama, where audio of the bells chiming in Spitalfield will be turned on. You're only allowed to walk through the space in silence, which is really, really interesting. All the fires are burning, so there's this big sense of burning fires. When he really wants to get you at the top, you'll kind of walk in and a piss pot has been freshly watered. So you have that 19th century sense of earthiness, I guess. So they're using this other layer of how to experience history with the sound and the more visceral heat. You feel it lighter, really, really hot. And these are beautiful photographs my friend Dale's found her. And that's the building outside. It's Dennis. But there's also this really peculiar thing that links back to the cyclorama. When I first went into the house, I was like, this isn't like an 18th century house. This is like Monty Python. And he had made really funny constructions, like little speech bubbles on the ancestors' portraits, a little Mick Jagger walking stick, all of these. And so there's this incredible final layer of the 1970s when he was working on the house and the political kind of connotations of making a time capsule of a historic house really rang more true to me than, say, I feel like an 18th century Dane or a Sassoon's wench or whatever I'm supposed to feel like. So again, it links back to these layers, to an urgency and absolute need. He would get mad at people when he was live if you didn't get it, if you giggled or talked. I see myself growing into this person. This is the gentle poverty floor. So, because this is supposed to be this cool conference where you can just put something new up, I'm going to ask you if I sort of hit, these are the commonalities that I think I'm getting at every single one. All of them use an extra immersive technique beyond just the visual. They use either audio or scent. They're all built in an odd temporary yet longevity manner. Weirdly, I think they were all built to be temporary, but they ended up being popular, ergo longevity happened. They all put forward a layered history, not just a set, static, historic house history. They lack a historical provenance, but there's a deep, deep commitment to a sensory accuracy of the historical period. They're all completely of dubious taste, scholarship, and necessity in the world at large. And I have to admit that I would never ever show these to a student. But since you guys have already seen it, do what you will. And they're all, I think, constructing a political point of view or a cultural point of view, so I'd like to sort of put them, I'd like to work it more so they're political spaces. And finally, my intuitive part is that they're all desperately wanting you to have an authentic historic experience by walking through the space. Thank you.
I frame these arguments around build projects, but for the purposes today, I decided to frame the argument primarily around student work. Since this is an educational symposium, I thought it would be great to look at how students are really thinking in a very forward way about what the interior is. So a set of interiors can compromise a networked infrastructural system. Typically, infrastructure is understood as a network of transportation, communication, or utilities. According to Keller Easterling, infrastructure can be defined to include replicable building models that maintain an organization or information network. As individual buildings become reproducible products, no longer uniquely designed by architects, but rather engineered for function, they can be defined as an infrastructure and networked. Hence, a set of interior elements is systematized and reproducible. They can be considered a networked infrastructural interior condition. Network interiors can exist without architecture within a non-architectured site, a site that I borrowed from Graham Brooker, and it means a structure that's not typically considered an inhabitable architecture, or where the functionality of the interior is networked within a more typical architectural site. The interior network may be evidenced in a site that is part of an infrastructural network designed for human occupation, such as a subway station. The subterranean interiors of subway stations are typically designed as nodes in a network system, as defined by Kevin Lynch. There exist two distinct types of nodes. Those that are junctions and paths, and those that exist due to a concentration of a single type of use. In subway stations, interior specifications are determined by the requirements and replicated throughout. Often, station finishes are systematically linked as wayfinding devices. Atypical stations, or landmarks, as we can define them, might be more radically differentiated through a connection to their neighborhood or as a site for public art. Lynch reports that landmarks can be observed, but they cannot be passed through. moving to student work. For her 2015 graduate thesis in Interior Design at Pratt Institute, Britt Bender studied subway platforms. She developed a kit of parts for the design of stations, hence replicable systems, throughout the system. The station interiors are networked, but they maintain individuality as some elements can be customized. Notable parts of Bender's system include column color change, where the color change indicates the portion of the platform where trains stop. In stations where train lengths are less than that of the entire station, signaling to users that a difference between the waiting and non-waiting portions of the platform. So you would look toward the green portion on this platform. If you've ever ridden the G train in New York, it is considered an underutilized system, and they shorten the train. So people who don't know that are always running for the train from end to end, but this column color change would address that issue. Column color is also coordinated with the train line color to communicate which train the waiting area is for. The pictogram tiles depict a variety of activities, conditions, and items associated with waiting on a subway platform. The individual pictograms may spark ideas for how to use waiting time. When viewed from a distance, the pictograms have a functional utility as pixels forming station signage. The responsive tiles are combined modules that directly respond to the rider's body, offering both the durability of a hard surface and the comfort of a soft surface. Extruded ergonomic tiles form places where riders rest their belongings or bodies. And rail seating expands on the lariat seating loops at the 33rd Street station in New York City by artist James Garvey. Bender's proposal varies the height of the bronze rail as it wraps around the column to provide riders with increased options and accounts for physical differences between the riders. So these become part of a system. Not all aspects need to be in all stations, but you begin to have a network that exists not only because the train moves through it, but because the interior items have a relationship to each other. Alan and Helen Wexler's Overlook 2007 at Atlantic Terminal as a subterranean entrance to the Long Island Railroad, or LIRR, and the New York City subway. Overlook is intended to remind observers of the rocky outcroppings at scenic view rest areas that occur along national highways. Fabricated from the same quotidian tile as the rest of the station, it questions the relationship between nature and mathematics, between the rendered and the pixelated, creating a balance between abstraction and replacement. Overlook, in its construction, celebrates the unique interiority of the subway system. It is meant to remind us of subway's subterranean existence and speak about excavation, strata, and geology. Obviously, it's not quite in a building because it is underground. And though it is not repeated, it is a critical aspect of the network, as it is a subterranean occupiable interior landmark and part of a larger system of landmarks throughout the system. And what's interesting of note here is that it's contradictory to Lynch's proposition that landmarks can't be occupied. So I think this is a really unique landmark networked interior that's not within a building that is occupiable and can be passed through. An above-ground railway, the High Line, has prompted a deluge of adaptive reuse proposals for underground abandoned subway stations and tracks, including the Low Line in New York City, proposals for the reuse of 11 derelict stations in Paris, and a proposal termed the London Underline. Gensler's 2015 proposal for the London Underline continues the functionality of the network system from the original program for a subway to a newly networked transportation system for pedestrians and cyclists that includes cultural and retail spaces. So moving on to non-architecture. When land use patterns shift, some infrastructures become defunct, leaving their structures underutilized or underused and unoccupied. The shells of these now unnecessary systems can be adaptively reused to serve as new or shared purpose through the redesign of their interior. The parking garage functions as an adaptively reused infrastructural interior, both as a space that is systematized, networked, and regulated by a rule set in its construction, and as a node in a transportation system. The parking garage as a design site is rich fodder for the intersection of systematized, prefabricated, and/or mobile interiors. The floor plan of a typical parking garage is generated with a relatively regular module. It maintains a standard incline and is a space that can be considered interior and exterior at once. Arguably, the parking garage is a place of interiority. It compromises the ceiling and floor, and it provides a space of at least partial enclosure that is somewhat protected from the elements. Though it is technically a building, it was designed for the requirements of the car as its primary inhabitant and not for human habitation. Its architecture is typically quite secondary to civil engineering strategies, placing it in a category more aligned with bridges or tunnels rather than architecture. Also, considering recent strategies to eliminate personal car ownership through the promotion of better biking conditions, car sharing, and more robust public transportation, the need for parking garages is decreasing. About 50% are underutilized. This is a New York statistic, by the way, not an LA one. Due to the diminishing necessity for parking, the usage of a parking garage might be mapped to utilize the modular space alternatively or simultaneously for parking and an additional type of habitation. The SCADPAD project approaches the rehabilitation of the parking garage as an adaptive reuse of the garage to coexist with dorm or living spaces. The dimensions of the modular living units and interstitial community spaces are derived from those of the parking spaces. The interior is at once interior and exterior, making possible the multiple programs that are layered onto the site. The placement of the dwelling units in the common areas are determined to best acclimatize those areas for habitation and function. The prototype is replicable and movable, and it's networked. For their interior design theses at Pratt Institute, I'm about to say all the work I'm showing is my student work. Alexandra Goldberg and Talika Lacapur both studied the Macy's parking garage in downtown Brooklyn. During the weekdays, automobile occupancy is at 80%, but on the weekend, occupancy levels reduced to 20 to 30%, leaving a majority of the structure empty at this time. This low-level weekend occupancy makes shared programming viable. Goldberg proposes a pop-up hotel for off-peak parking times. The proposal for the pop-up hotel is entirely temporal and makes no permanent mark on the structure. The hotel room in its most compressed form is 48 inches by 48 inches by 40 inches. It's a prefabricated box proportioned such that it can be readily shipped on standard shipping pallets, so it can be moved in and out easily, not just in this garage, but to garages in other locations, other cities. Once on site, the box can be opened and converted into a hotel room that fits in the dimensions of one parking space. A portion of the box's exterior can be removed to form furniture for use in common spaces outside of the room. The furniture is designed to adjust to the inhabitants' needs with consideration for typical garage floor slopes, so you can alter the position of your chair if you're going to be more upright or more lounge. Just really thinking about the existing condition of a typical garage. At the weekend's end, the hotel is packed up and shipped to the next site. And looking at the parts of this modular system, it's replicable, it's movable, and it's an idea that this network can exist simultaneously in multiple cities or move from city to city. Lacapur proposes 3 programmatic strategies to be layered onto the existing parking garage program to encourage sustainable action. The first added program is a small donation center permanently built on the third floor of the parking garage, where the parking garage and donation center programs operate simultaneously, so because she mapped 20% under usage, she was able to permanently take some of the parking spaces for this purpose. The second added program, a pop-up fashion retail environment, alternates with the parking garage, and it's activated only on the weekends when the parking garage is typically at 20 to 30%. Vendor stalls, which pull down from the ceiling, or currently fixed ceiling, to be operable, are dimensionally determined by the parking module as well. The third added program folds off of the donation center structure twice a year for a redefined sustainable New York Fashion Week. The interior adaptations referenced above and on previous pages represent the replicable models that potentially form a network of linked programmatic and physical interior use. The installations could be repeated across space and be located as part of a larger system over time. Moving on to architecture at sites, a set of interiors can't transcend their architecture and comprise a networked infrastructural system within an architecture site. As previously noted, the scope of the definition of infrastructure has come to include replicable building models that maintain an organizational or information network, and hence a replicable interior that's part of an information network can also be understood as infrastructure. This hypothesis will be analyzed through brief case studies of 2 typologies of networked interiors: public libraries, presented here as a hybrid, traditional neighborhoods through a network of transformative and adaptable interiors. His primary objective in creating or utilizing this network was to reduce the disruptive potential of disasters on multiple scales, from an outage in a single building to a neighborhood or broader. He found that such an interior network actually already exists within the public libraries. As a testing site, Atkins selected the Clinton Hill Branch Library in Brooklyn, New York, but theoretically his interior system could be adapted at smaller or larger scales at any library. The Clinton Hill Library is a relatively modest, single-story, cinder block construction. The library is a branch of the Brooklyn Public Library system, which includes 58 branches and one central library. As books become readily available in digital format, the library's spatial needs are at best diminished. So again, this sort of leads to research where there's an underuse, and we can then modify program due to that. At the worst, this raises the question as to whether they are necessary at all. Atkins proposes that the integration of two critical programs makes the existence of each more viable. He investigates the idea that disaster relief can be layered onto an already established network system, the library. The library is by its programmatic intent and network information system is arguably a prototypical network interior space. The form of the building envelope is not necessarily relevant to the network, but its interior components are typical, replicable, standardized elements such as card catalogs, bookcases, carols, etc. The purpose of his proposal is to piggyback onto an arguably existing network system, which he can then retrofit into a further connected and transformative interior system. The library's interior spaces, which are already linked as part of an information network, can then take on a secondary program to transform to operate as disaster relief shelter as required. Atkins' proposal identifies three primary design strategies to facilitate the sharing of programs. The bookcase, the sofa, and the booth. The bookcase is designed to pivot so that it can readily create semi-private shelter sleeping areas. The bookcase can also store books, emergency supplies, and shelter inhabitants' belongings. The sofa structure can transform between a low arm height and privacy height, as well as from a place to sit to a place to sleep. The backrests become side tables. When they are connected together, the sofa employs variation in color and materials to annotate which sections can be annotated. The seat cushions are double-sided with program-appropriate fabric on each side, one for library seating and the other for disaster relief sleeping. The booth transforms from a place to sit to a private place to sleep. It also employs variation in color and materials to annotate which sections can be annotated, or activated, sorry. The booth seat slides between the walls and forms a full-size bed. The bed contains integrated storage for linens and personal items. These elements are also replicable and can be fitted into the existing system, generating an additional layer of networked interior for disaster relief over the already networked library. So moving on to POPs, or privately owned public spaces. The New York City privately owned public space system, or POPs program, was established to incentivize zoning in response to the 1961 zoning resolution in New York City. The POPs program consists of 525 spaces within or adjacent to buildings that were granted additional floor area or related waivers in exchange for providing public interior-exterior space. The addition or maintenance of a POPs requires adherence to a very specific rule set that prescribes design criteria for the habitation of POPs, both interior and exterior. The most critical criteria for the occupation of interior spaces include specifications for seating, planting trees, lighting, and electrical power, litter receptacles, and public space signage. Larger spaces also are required to provide additional amenities depending on their square footage. So, second person to mention Trump today. Trump breached the POPs network rules and he replaced the seating with a kiosk to sell Trump merchandise. There was an ongoing case to prevent him from doing so because he is part of POPs. The rule set specifically provides that he has to have seating. So finally the city went out and Trump did have to replace his kiosks with benches again. He did get approximately 20 stories to add to his building by adhering to this Trump rule. I would argue that sadly this POPs is not functioning as it should anymore because there's security at the gate now and you can barely get into it. So, it's supposed to be part of the system but not operating well. I wanted to follow that up with this a POPs that operates really well, and sadly Billy Sen is no longer here, but this is a POP related to the Billy Sen project. It's the David Rubenstein Atrium near Lincoln Center. The POP spaces, by intent, should encourage, this one does, extraordinarily well. They should encourage free public occupation, which in the case of Trump Plaza was obstructed by kiosks and now security, as shown in the previous slide. This idea of public occupation is a really unique phenomenon for the interior, as its occupation is typically privatized, either as personal or commercialized space. The interior furnishings and fixtures within the POPs are not required to be precisely the same, so they're not exactly replicable, as I noted in earlier slides that is required for networks. But they do follow a pretty precise prescriptive set of criteria that keep them as part of the network in perpetuity. So in conclusion, these interior elements of the noted typologies exist as distinct from architecture, are repeated structures engineered for function that facilitate a network between multiple interiors. A robust consideration for the design for network interiors is critical to interior spatial design and sustainable building practice. The design strategies for the interiors of network subway systems, which typically exist without a building, are crucial to human well-being, perception of place and wayfinding. The implementation of adaptive reuse or shared use for infrastructural networked interiors can prevent the demolition of structure, possibly even allow the initial program to continue with a new symbiotic relationship. The design of a networked interior can transcend the site, architecture or non-architecture, hierarchically elevating the design for repeatable and reproducible networked interior elements. And just as a last one I mentioned earlier, it's research and extension of my soon-to-be published book titled Interiors Beyond Architecture. It'll be out in August from Rutledge, and it's edited with Amy Campos, who some of you work with, I think. The book addresses the interior's impact beyond the inside of buildings, analyzing significant interiors that engage space beyond the disciplinary boundaries of architecture. It looks at 10 typologically specific invited chapters that address inhabitable art, interiors for display, infrastructural interiors, film sets, repurposed interiors, mobile interiors, interiors found in nature, extreme environments, interior landscapes, and exterior spaces with interior conditions. So, just to end this, I've been really proud to be able to contribute to the body of knowledge of interior design through publication and through this seminar. I think we've been underrepresented, and it's such a critical moment for all of us. So thank you, Woodbury, for hosting this today, and thank you for being here.
I would like to say many thanks to the Symposium organizers that came out, but especially Peterson and the Lady of Gold for fielding all my very last minute emails, it seems like. All right. I'll begin by admitting that it's actually quite challenging to find any one given opinion on curtains. They remain outside the traditional scope and canon of architecture, an unmentionable that is often attributed to notions of frivolity and femininity. This presentation is a piecemeal alternative history that plays on the double entendre of curtain. It focuses on three themes: curtain as wall, curtain as boundary, and the curtain as container, lending disciplinary depth to an often dismissed decoration. The seed for this research began in 2010 during a trip to Barcelona. Having studied Mee's canonical project very closely, I was shocked to see this red curtain. The curtain isn't represented in the plan drawing commonly circulated in architecture history courses, and most photos of the pavilion omit the striking velvet plane in preference of monochromatic museum space. But there may be some parents today, just kind of an introduction here, that know the specific history of this image, and from what I understand and what some deep internet searching tells me, is that when Parsons launched their interior design program, they too held a symposium in conjunction with the Department of Architecture, and this was the event collateral. This image and the title, Curtain Wars, was pulled as they clearly reinforced the disciplinary stereotypes that interior design is garish while architecture is timeless. The Curtain Wars were clearly a political battle yet to be won, self-portrait by artist Juno Lifson clearly, or eloquently, I would say, captures the battleground. Curtains are latently feminine, domestic, frilly, and sometimes, oftentimes, in bad taste, which we've already talked about taste today. Like architecture, curtains have inherent semiotics. The new administration's first order of business was to change the curtains in the Oval Office, announcing a new political identity and its subsequent ideologies through curtains. If civic spaces represent national identity and pride, then there's something slightly off-putting about this overtly optimistic pink curtain-ish wall, North Korea's national theater. Curtains and pageantry do go hand in hand. The daily routine at Versailles, for example, began with the bed curtains, a stage set to witness the spectacle of court life. These theatrical curtains were embedded with symbols of identity, each palatial space branded through the brocades and silks for various members of the royal family. Ironically, the one place in which a curtain should be a curtain is in the performance space of the theater, yet this trompe-l'oeil curtain is not crafted of needle and thread, but rather of paint and canvas. Which brings me back to the way in which curtains are often typified and represented. It's often categorically based on historic period styles. So let's unpack this disciplinary taboo of curtains, beginning with the seedling, the German pavilion. Curtain as wall. I'll admit my first impression of the red curtain was one of slight distaste. I thought perhaps it was a ploy by the Spanish government when it was reconstructed. In actuality, the curtain was in fact always part of the original pavilion. The curtain fulfilled the German government's requirement for the national flag to be represented in the pavilion at the International Exhibition in 1929. Hence, a red curtain, black carpet, gold onyx comprised an abstraction of the German flag. Here's another project by me, the IIT Chapel, in which the curtain, a play on the choir screen, is the predominant focus of the interior. Yet the drawings represent the curtain as a planar and static surface. The softness of the curtain offsets the otherwise hard and industrial interior, typical of mid-century Mies, holiness and mass production. These types of observations should come as no surprise. We know from historians such as Beatrice Colmena that architects heavily curate images to reinforce their manifestos. In the Tugendhat House, for example, the free plan and ribbon window are celebrated in the top image. The bottom image, however, produces an entirely different interior. Exterior views are denied, and an extreme interiority emerges. In a rarely seen view of the Farnsworth House, the pulled curtains turn off the magic that makes the Farnsworth House so compelling. Transparency, lightness, domestic life as spectacle. Instead, we get an opaque house that begs us to ask, when is the next showtime? From the inside, the curtains provide the necessary privacy for living in a glass house. They also soften the stark transition between interior and exterior worlds. Another editorial fallacy includes Adolf Loos's Steiner House, in which the curtains are pivotal in separating program, yet no curtain can be found in the plan, nor in these two common images of the interior. But alas, here they are. I find it odd that this is a rare project image, since the partie appears to be quite dependent on the curtains as offering a flexible interior solution that architecture simply cannot. Even at the designated origin site of modern architecture, there is a curtain. An in-suite bathroom, this curtain had to be a curtain and not a wall to epitomize the sterile cleanliness of the modern interior, a machine for germ-free living. Court did use curtains, and it should be said that he did occasionally put them in his sketches. His curtains, however, conjured more the type of curtains that were in the sleeping bunks of sailors on sea vessels. No surprise. As the international style continued to thrive, curtains remained ever present to reconcile the voyeuristic gaze of curtain wall systems. The popularity of mid-century curtain wall towers paralleled the acceleration of advertising. Theorist Reinhold Martin talked about the curtain wall towers as screens reflecting media culture. Oddly enough, the mass production ethos of the international style in its curtain walls come undone at the sight of window coverings. The standardization of building materials had been streamlined, yet curtains were still bespoke and custom made. But how does one assess a curtain wall? Based on its component systems or based on its fenestration? You can see the dilemma here in classification is about function or aesthetics. But curtains were also once intricate systems of standardization in the early 19th century and into the Industrial Revolution. The book, An Analysis of Drapery, or The Upholsterer's Assistant, emerged around the same time as post-revolutionary architectural encyclopedias, such as Duran's Prestige. The use of the grid introduces drapery as more than whimsical decoration, but as a rather strategic design problem of understanding typologies and executing their engineered forms through the rationality of Cartesian geometry. As drapery evolved, so did the systems of measurement and pattern making. So let's consider a moment when these two systems of curtains and curtain walls collapse. These are reflective curtains that do the protective work of a glazed facade. They're UV coated and they insulate the building. Alright, so one of my favorite curtain walls is Omame's Casa de Musica, sitting across here from an actual glass mullion curtain wall system is curtain wall glass. These wavy glass walls can be found throughout the building. They distort both the space and the image, and provide an unusual instance in which our bodies can occupy the space between the curtains. So it's like the space between these two pieces of glass have been scaled up to the size of this corridor. Here's a fun detail with the multiple curtain systems all together, as I can see. In 2014, for the Venice Biennale, Rem Koolhaas released a book series on the elements of architecture. In the wall primer, there is one sole curtain in the entire book, and it's from the 1922 Biennale. In fact, he doesn't even highlight the curtain as the wall. The green, light green highlight there is the wall above the curtain hanging on the wall. No respect. Moving past this slide, though, curtains as exhibitionary devices protect artworks not only from harsh sunlight and transform the interior quickly when architecture cannot, a quality often attributed to curtains and drapery on historic interiors, doubling as insulation and decorative covering over the architecture, until hardly any architecture is left and the interior has been consumed by fabric. Eventually, curtains began to spatially subdivide rooms as walls, so there was hierarchical private space within the private space of a bedchamber. And much like the Queen's chamber at Versailles, the bed itself becomes the most private interior within the bedchamber. A lesson Carlo Melito knows very well, as this gauzy canopy bed is surrounded by a curtain-lined wall, and absolute removal from the exterior produces deep interiority, mystery, and seduction. Going off on a tangent here for a moment, we're going to sell some loaves, but I would be remiss not to mention the biggest offender of the sexy curtain game, Adolf Loos. The two well-known images of the Lena Loos bedroom reveal a continuous curtain on the interior. In 2014, the map recreated this Loos bedroom. In fact, they even got it just slightly off-center enough in their documentation of it, which I really appreciate, on the top right corner. But the details are eerily accurate, such as the box pleats and the dust skirts on the curtains and the side dressing tables. But here's a rare look at the everyday Loos bedroom. Curtains drawn to access the armoire and to get views to the outside. Or the odd views of the fake pochette behind the curtain in the 2014 installation, where the real architecture built-in closets would typically reside. After their divorce, Adolf Loos designed a similar whitewashed apartment for Lena with very similar themes of softly covered walls and more pleated skirts. The cabinets were not hidden out of sight, but were rather exposed and lined with curtains, reaffirming the suspicion that these rooms were in fact cabinets for the precious object, or in this case, woman. But I digress back to Molino's interiors, capturing feminine seduction, and serving as impromptu sets for his hobby of soft porn Polaroids. By the time Shigeru Ban's curtain wall in the house, the Duchess agrees in 1995, seduction is no longer inhibited by exterior walls, but freely expressed in the streets. As curtains move beyond the interior, they become the exterior facades. Their function as curtain produces an inverted relationship, kind of like wearing your underwear on the outside of your clothes. It's not surprising then that the gesture of a curtain eventually succumbs to tectonic volume, relegated simply to surface technique. So from left to right, we have the curtain inside the curtain wall, the inhabitable curtain wall, the dematerialized curtain wall, the curtain on a curtain wall, and the curtaining curtain wall. Historically, a curtain was the structural transition between the main house and the summer kitchen, in a colonial and southern plantation homes. Depending on the climate, a curtain was either completely enclosed or entirely open to the landscape. Some homes ended up transforming their curtains to colonnades. But the curtain takes this boundary between interior and exterior environments, even in nationally picturesque ways. Curtain as a program. A quintessential project that uses curtains to reinforce programming is the Maison Moderator by Woodbury. Revisited by firm inside and outside, the thousands of programmers is really delineated in this fantastic way. The apertures in the curtains and materials need to tell a story about space, such as the portal into tiny living window and the white living curtain, and nod to modernism. The shiny kitchen of vinyl curtain in the digital room. The mild curtain in the master bedroom is less light and also provides a soft trickle on the breeze. The adjacent master bathroom's pink curtain feels strongly reminiscent of the Melissa Boggs curtain. A double-layered curtain of floating squares diffuses light and then the other side of the kitchen's bedroom. And a diaphragm curtain sways one way into interior and exterior. Not only can the curtain as a program as a function in the space, but it can also transform and enhance the space, as this diagram represents all ride and demonstrates. A tightly lounge track stores the curtain not in use, and takes on some architectural language of a fluted column. Embedded in the curtain are the speakers, so that when the auditorium is used for immersive presentations, the audience is surrounded by a curtain of sound. Lastly, the curtain as a container. A key historic curtain project was Lily Wright's collaboration on the Velvet's Cafe. In fact, most of the curtains in these Miller are contributed to Lily. The large silk and velvet curtains created complex yet fully flexible spaces, distributing spatial hierarchy and eroding the hard lines of public versus private space. In the most recent exhibition, How She Lived, the curtains offer a similar gesture of the original, but the part is really missing forward. I'll conclude the glasses building, a project I believe to have quintessential principle, an interior celebrated by its architectural and thoughtful use of curtains. A museum for glass, but also a monument to anti-architecture. Songs of the millions singing in the whole town to glass, which no doubt provided glass spots of all those mid-century curtain wall towers. Protective curtains shield direct assembly as walls are dematerialized to reveal an intangible and often illegible architecture of the cliche. Visitors are denied access to this interstitial space between the gallery walls, but the curtains are not as they move through it in between space. It's an act of cliche. Inside out is a diagram for blocks of chocolates, suggesting individually wrapped spaces within it. So I highlighted a big project as facilitating curtains, but perhaps not explicitly known for curtains as a major activity driving architectural spaces themselves. Hopefully now this is a new understanding of curtains and how they can provide new possibilities beyond mere addressing. Thank you.
Personally, I don't, because I like curtains too. But I think it goes back to the taste question, that there just got to be a norm of conversation about any final layer, any filigree in a space was additive, therefore tasteless or not good or applied. So I think they're just, it got a bad rap, ultimately.
I should say too that the image I was using to leverage that particular point, the reason, I didn't go into depth because I had way too many slides, but the artist, it's the mask she's wearing is Linda Evans Rejuvenator, so Linda Evans from Dynasty, and then of course looking at the interior and the fact that she's wearing a beaded gown, it's very dynastical to begin with, so then the interiors of Dynasty communicating this idea of nouveau riche, money, and what those interiors look like. It goes back totally to the idea of taste, but they probably weren't garish then, and now we look at them and they're
I think that what sets interiors off from their architectural counterpoint, whether they be within architecture or within a non-architectural site, is that they're more temporal and they maybe better or more readily reflect the inhabitant. So that's why, in these photographs, the canonical photographs, we see the architecture that the architect intended or wanted imposed probably on the inhabitant. And then, particularly in the Farnsworth image where Edith Farnsworth was inhabiting it, we see that she actually had a very different type of furniture. She closed curtains. She saw more private life within what was a very public home.
And that happens actually in mine when I talk to students about the Eames house. In the beginning photographs, that I always think that Charles was there getting the photographs when it was just built, but by the time they lived in it, Ray, being kind of a secret Victorian, had really layered it with like all this stuff of life.
Then if we have Edith Farnsworth, Ray Eames, Lily Wright, petroglyphs, what was the role of gender in this?
Earlier today we talked about how so often that when it is domestic, it's feminine and it's dismissed. So,
there's a deep relationship, I think, to women's work in textile. That's kind of basic. And it's a conversation that's in the textile world, and where the interior discipline is sort of, bringing it in conversation. So I think there's an intuitive condition that happens. So I think it's history, not necessarily a judgment on gender necessarily.
Well, I also think it's interesting because when you state the roles of the women that you noted in particular, they were inhabitants, sometimes they were the interior designer, the furniture maker, oftentimes they were actually trained as architects that took on an interior role. But these women actually weren't even recognized as having a role at all until recently. So the fact that anyone even knows who they are is a bit of a recent mystery. Yeah, we never learned about their role in all of this.
Another major organization of classical building in Toledo, which is exquisite. There's nothing garish about it. Done with, agree with, folks on that. Well, that takes us then maybe to the politics of it, because we've heard a lot about politics of structure and buildings projecting power. But what about interiors? You all touched on that a little bit. Can you talk more about how the interiors can be political statements?
Well, I'm trying to make a case that the interiors that I put forward were crap. Because they were made by designers, they were crafted to make a point. Like while studying, wanting to show that there was a particular way to be a woman in a very fast-changing world. So he constructed an environment in order to show that political belief. The cyclorama is interesting because it flows back and forth. Whether the Civil War was, who won the Civil War even, that was up for grabs. So
It was.
Yeah, I grew up in Atlanta. Probably might still be the issue. So I think that
Kind of like who won the last election.
exactly. So I'm trying to now find over-imagined interiors that state this case, that where a kind of American citizen or an everyday citizen constructs their interior in order to put forward a value system.
I would say there's a couple of hinge points, at least with the scope of this presentation today. The first one being that the moment in which the revolution, the 17th century, really the revolution, so before that, everything is sort of overly ornate and, like burning the curtains, everyone's seizing the palace. And then what emerges after that is completely 2D, totally plainer, neoclassical curtain coverings, or it's just reduced to the simple plaster graphic on the wall, and then the bed is no longer swags and tassels upon tassels. At Versailles, it's rather very rectilinear and totally logical, capturing the classic silhouette. And then the moment, also in, I see it as a political moment in modernism, where at, say, the Esprit Nouveau Pavilion, the window is clearly something that has to be customized. It's not at all something that comes off the forwarding of assembly line at all. And that means that the curtain has to be customized. So it's completely antithetical to the politics that were latent in the ideas of the architecture and what the interior could be. And then, of course, showing the two presidential offices. That's like the most explicit. Like the first business of order, the thing that blew up the Twitter sphere on that day after the changing of the guard was curtains, and they're a copy of Bill Clinton's curtains, and all of this, and what do the colors mean? And I mean, it's super important to look at those gestures. We already talked about how it constructs identity. So to not look at those details would be remiss. And I was looking for curtains all day long in all the presentations, I will say that, to see if there's any other stories or politics latent in those images.
I don't think that I addressed politics at all in my presentation, but I'd say that the political party is true. I think the political stance is a differentiation of what the field of interior design or interior architecture is, that it's not necessarily a subset of architecture or a sub-trade of architecture, but it's something that can exist quite on its own in environments that are not part of our architecture realm at the moment, and also that hierarchically the interior can have like a really substantial and profound legitimacy and place that hierarchically makes it significant in its own right and celebrated. So that idea of a network where interior to interior have this greater connection, I think is important and timely.
Maybe we can push that just a little bit more. What is it about the essence of interiors that makes a political statement in a different way?
Well, I was really fascinated with the Oval Office image because it could so rapidly, like our curtains could so rapidly change the interior. So messages, like it's like the Twitter of, it's a new, it looked like a tool. Like it's, if he went out, what would the curtains be like that day? So I was really intrigued. That to me showed it as a business curtain, as a tool.
Yeah, a device, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it is, sort of a very sleight of hand for some kind of propaganda at some point. And it is interesting because I don't think that, I should know that history much better, but it's actually really difficult to find. I I think it was, I mean, I know curtains always happen in the Oval Office, but I think it wasn't until Jackie Kennedy.
Right.
Really, it
But
came
there
in.
actually is a series of where they put the, I don't know what room it is, but where they put that Christmas tree, and you can see the change, so there's meaning there. We'll work on it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, everything in that room is super highly curated, you know, from the sculpture to the left of the desk to what the rug is, to what the sofas are covered in, the upholstery of it. And, you know, a lot of criticism, even when Obama's administration was there, was like, oh, there's not enough red, white, blue in the office. And so it's always, I mean, people read into it, but no one sees the rug as often or the sculpture as often as they see the curtains when the signing of things are happening in front of them on the desk, and that's really the backdrop. Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your questions.
Yeah,
Talk about this.
well, since we're talking about maybe if we talk about the ephemeral nature of interiors, let's understand each of
So
the
as a device too, I think that curtains help with that ephemerality. So it can do the thing that a lot of times architecture cannot. So I think that the Maison Bordeaux is one of the best ones, examples, just because of all of the curtains that are in there. So each time, you know, you can pull one back, you can pull one forward, you can, so some of them are actually double layered. So you start to get not one architecture, but maybe like 5 architectures out of a singular interior. So absolutely, I think that as a device, it's performative in that way too.
And changing, I mean, either your library that changes into a disaster relief center or a parking garage that changes our interiors. That's one of their benefits, right? One of the values that they can change more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that these networked interiors that I've spoken about today really take advantage of the temporal nature of the interiors. So the students who are looking at these networks, like the roving hotel room, it's really considering the site, but the site as a part of a larger system and creating an interior that can really radically shift what happens programmatically in that space. And Alex Goldberg, who created that project, did create a curtain. It was kind of a 3D printed curtain that was soft and hard at once. And there were some pieces that I showed that looked like wood, but it was actually wood material screwed and printed onto foam. So there was this kind of hard outer edge for transportation of the box. The wall of the box was the box that got transported. But within it was a tent-like structure that popped up to make a different interior, more ephemeral space that was very soft to the touch, actually unexpected when we stepped inside of the hotel room itself. And also with Michael Goldberg's, with Michael's project, he was looking at this really hard system of transformability, and he's really good at systems and really good at the idea of network. But one of the things that I sort of forced him to do as his faculty member was to dig deeper and start to look at patterns. So the last pattern I showed was his original network diagram transformed into a pattern that he printed onto fabric and showed as part of his final project. And the idea that he looked at the upholstery of the chair and thought about how the temporal nature of this library versus disaster relief shelter could change simply by having different fabric on different sides of this cushion and flipping it to change the role of the space. So these are kind of radical temporal interiors, but I think that they really address the idea that the interior can be modified and changed.
And the temporality of it becomes its power.
It does become its power. It becomes like the occupant or the inhabitant can really take control of that environment.
I've been investing to learn recently. You all probably noticed that in some buildings in LA, especially downtown, the first 5 or 6 floors of the apartment that they built have 14-foot ceilings because they're expecting that soon the need for parking will be diminished, and they'll just convert those into offices or residences. Yeah. So again, parking garage interchange and all. What about then, if it's changing, if it's ephemeral, what about authenticity, which is kind of funny since you show us that around. Even the German pavilion is a reconstruction. Yeah. What about authenticity in terms of the essences of the interiors?
I mean, I think the cyclogram, you know, that George we need to be in the battle. And evidently, I mean, from the research I've done of the attendance, once that foreground came in, that attendance went up because veterans would bring their families in, and there's midnight pride because it was exactly like, really, the battle when I was at Key Street Creek and I faced. So, you know, and I think for me is to reproduce the authentic is what I'm really, and it's different than faux.
It's not faux.
I don't think it is. Anyway,
The feelings are authentic.
the feelings are authentic and God without structure. Yeah, so I mean, it's, the authenticity is confusing, but intriguing. You know, Dennis Sievers lived in, he was the Jervis, the whole Jervis family.
Yeah.
You know, he was 80 people that were operating in the house and pulled down the beds and poured the water. And, you know,
I suppose Isabel Stewart Gardner was playing a role as well.
yeah.
Sir Johnson.
Yeah.
And how about authenticity? You know, some Rams work there reference Korner in Barcelona as a reconstruction, which feels like it's great to go there, but it feels like a reconstruction.
Totally. I mean, it's when I saw the paint back. I mean, aside from I'm always drawn to paint stuff now, but when I saw the paint bathroom, so it's an ensuite bathroom as well, and it's so adjacent to the master bedroom. It's in the master bedroom. It's the same scenario as the Villa Savoie, and knowing that lifts off the ground. I mean, all of the like symbols and all of the redundancies and sort of interpretations of modernism and form and riffs on it. I mean, I think that I never realized that curtain, or when I saw that bathroom, I was like, oh yeah, it's Villa Savoie. Like he's taking the lessons of the modernism, and well, it's not really a bathroom technically in this case. And she's turning it on its head a little bit because then it becomes pink. It's no longer the white, the sterile white, and the very militant, minimal. All you need is to like have this piece of cloth cover your bunk and you're good. But I think that the authenticity, it is a bit weird, especially given the doppelganger of a 1986 reconstruction and what that means. But I think that the thing about curtains is latent in what they are as objects and devices is always theater and spectacle and some kind of superficial that you're constructing a world no matter what. So authenticity it sort of goes out the window in some ways.
The Farnsworth House could be seen as a temple to convenience, like so, goddess of the shades.
Absolutely. I mean, that interior with the Lewis interior, I mean, I didn't put them in that order, but I mean, it's the way that the male architects really, when the female was the client, the way that the interior all of a sudden starts, and there's a student who's doing this for her thesis, so I'm not going to steal her thunder, but the way that it really made the women so precious as objects and delicate, a menagerie of sorts with self-padding, really speaks to that identity. But I don't know if it speaks to the authenticity of the woman. It's obviously the mindset of how the male wants to encase the women.
And even at Barcelona is the statue.
Of course, yes.
5 minutes. Let's take some questions from. Yes, Paulette.
Hi, Courtney. This is a question for you. Looking at the curtain in the Lowe's room, which we've been having a mutual conversation about regarding sex food. Oh, sorry. Like I can yell really loud anyway. But so looking at the Lowe's interior, what occurred to me is that there's also the curtain in the hospital room. And the sound that you hear when the metal on the rod comes open and closed, right? We can all feel that right now. And so by wrapping Lena in that curtain, she also turns her into a patient. It's infantilizing, and it's also kind of placing her in the realm of the sick. And I just thought that could be an interesting take on on the curtains and where you're going with this? Which I'm sure you've already thought about.
No, not at all. Sort of the general hospital.
Absolutely.
And along those lines also, we did show she remodels Curtin House, but he also, for disaster relief centers, he uses his paper tubes to make partitions and then just curtains to give people some dignity.
Yeah. I think I have to ruminate on that for a little bit. I mean, of course, modernism and this idea of sick patients, it goes hand in hand, right? But I do find it odd when you move from that bedroom into the apartment after they've gone their separate ways. And I sort of see, it's not quite the same device. It's no longer the clinking brass rings with the pipe. It looks like it's kind of upholstering the wall, but it's hard to see with that kind of detail. So then I wonder, he's no longer taking care of his patient. She's been, she leaves the hospital and goes into a padded cell. I mean, how terrible. No, I'm gonna have to think about that.
Any other questions? Yes.
I was thinking of curtain as garment and as gown, and there's something about the curtain taking on an exaggerated scale in terms of apparel. That suddenly, instead of just being scale-wise a part of the closet, it then begins to address the whole of the environment. And maybe that has something to do with, in a gender kind of way, what the threat is.
Yeah, having always an interest in the intersection between fashion and architecture, absolutely. I tried to sidestep that, but I know that it's hard to avoid. That, of course, textile and the volume and the way that it expresses. It is interesting to see, and we had this conversation earlier, I mean, we were talking about crochet, but it is interesting to see that the moment when gowns of the Versailles court start to get really out of control with all of the artifice below and the bustles and hats is the moment in which upholstery, drapery, and crochet start to really bulk up as well. And then the moment in which it's done, like the gap, it drops, the blade drops, is the French Revolution. And then we go to Rousseau and the natural flow of the dress. The dresses are very hemmed, there's no bustle, empire waistline. We have plainer architecture surfaces. The curtains are much more demure. Yeah, I do think that there's some kind of connotation. I think because of it being affiliated to dress, I don't know if it's problematic or not, but it seems that yes, it could be engendered because it goes to that particular article of dress.
I think it is. I'm an architect, but I practice interior design, and I've collaborated with a lot of architects in the past, and I think that it still brings up a lot in terms of, just in a very practical way, the use of fabric at a certain scale. I think it's more of a scale issue, actually, as it has a certain kind of power and impact.
I think it is scale. If architecture is shelter, then our primary shelter would be garments. We have time for one more question? One more question, yes.
Hi, I loved all your presentations, and I'll focus on the curtain aspect, because it also relates to the idea of crocheting, it's the ephemeral membrane between one space to another, so it kind of becomes a binding element of all your thoughts. So we're focusing on the curtain wall and the curtains as gathered material, but where's that the borderline? Because we look at shades and fabric panels as architectural, and I view them as curtains as well. And I'd love to see you expand that story to include that, because it offers it becomes almost non-existent when you kind of project on it and it captures light. And whereas curtains, when you gather, always becomes part of a physical element. So there's another space, I believe, that we can move into with curtains becoming just a simple element of capturing light. I don't know where your stand is on that. Anyone can answer that.
Well, for the length of, for the sake of the presentation length, it is interesting, and you are right. I mean, I think that things like certain lines or shades are architectural, equally architectural in the category of architecture. But I started to see there, and in curtains too, the offshoot for me starts back maybe, we were talking about this last night, in the Renaissance, when, building construction, windows were often much smaller because of insulation, and they were shuttered, and there were not curtains, you didn't glass, whatever. So you had shutters and then eventually tapestries to cover, and as you moved castles, chateaus, houses, whatever it may be, you could roll it up and you took it with you like you would furniture. And then much in the same way, curtains lined the walls and became the finishing surface of the architecture. The tapestries did the same. Of course, I didn't really go down that historic route, but that is something that I think could use even more exploration, because again, it's so difficult. I cannot tell you, I went to at least several libraries, looked on like all kinds of websites for books talking about maybe this history that is kind of in some books but not others. But yeah, as a lighting device, I mean, obviously in Renaissance, when it was closed, it was dark. When it was open, it was light. So curtains allow for that gradient, for that moment, the ephemerality, the flexibility that wasn't allowed with the more tectonic systems of tapestry over window, maybe pulled back, maybe not, but they're incredibly opaque. I do think that it becomes really interesting, though, when you get some tapestries that have trompe l'oeil effects of architecture also on them. But again, I digress.
So I think your best line needs to be the cartoon of the curtain coming down. Saying, that's all. So big thanks to Annie and Deborah.
So, thank you very much. We're going to have another 10-minute break now before we have our final session.